What if the warmest homes ever engineered for Arctic winters had no glass windows, no chimneys, no fiberglass insulation, and still outperformed many modern houses today? For centuries, Viking villages have been imagined as bleak and brutal places. Snow buried the ground. Wind cut through every crack. Darkness-filled, smoke-choked huts where survival meant constant misery. That image feels logical. And yet, it is wrong. Archaeology tells a quieter, more unsettling story. Viking communities did not merely endure winter. They lived inside it, year after year, generation after generation, and built homes that functioned not in spite of cold, but because they understood it. There was no magic involved. No heroic struggle against nature. No endless piles of firewood. Instead, there was engineering subtle, cumulative, and systemic. Every element of a Viking home worked together. The ground beneath it, the thickness of its walls, the movement of air, the presence of bodies, the behavior of smoke. Nothing existed in isolation. Heat was never wasted. Wind was never invited inside. And energy was never assumed to be infinite. To the Vikings, winter was not an enemy to conquer. It was a condition to manage. In a world where cold dominated most of the year, where fuel was scarce, and where wind could steal warmth faster than fire could replace it, they asked a different question than we do today. Not how to make more heat, but how to lose less of it. That single shift in thinking reshaped everything from the soil packed into their walls to the slow curl of smoke beneath their roofs. What they built was not just shelter. It was a system designed to keep life going when the world outside tried to freeze it away. The Viking longhouse was not a building in the modern sense. It was not a static object meant to isolate people from the world outside. It was a living organism. Archaeological remains across Scandinavia, Iceland, and Greenland reveal structures stretching 20, 40, sometimes more than 80 meters in length. Entire communities lived beneath a single roof. Families slept side by side. Elders worked near the hearth. Children moved through shared spaces. Labor, rest, and survival unfolded together. This was not crowding born of necessity. It was deliberate design. Human bodies generate heat continuously. By concentrating dozens of people into one enclosed volume, Vikings transformed population density into a renewable thermal resource. Warmth was shared, conserved, and redistributed simply by living together. No individual fought the cold alone. Even the shape of the longhouse reflected this logic. Its gently curved walls, echoing the hulls of Viking ships, allowed wind to slide around the structure instead of striking it head-on. These were not accidental forms. Viking builders were sailors first, engineers of moving through hostile environments. They brought maritime knowledge ashore and applied it to architecture. The house did not resist the wind. It guided it. Inside, every activity, sleeping, working, gathering, fed into a single thermal system. Like a ship's crew riding out a winter storm at sea, everyone aboard the longhouse became part of a shared survival mechanism. The building lived because the people inside it did. Despite how Viking homes are often imagined, they were not built as log cabins stacked with timber. In many Viking regions, especially Iceland and Greenland, wood was rare, fragile, and far too valuable to waste on thick walls that bled heat into the wind. Trees took generations to grow. Winter arrived every year. So the Vikings chose a different material. They chose the earth beneath their feet. Massive turf blocks were cut directly from the ground layers of soil woven together by dense grass roots. These blocks were stacked into walls that could reach 2 meters thick at the base, narrowing as they rose. The result was not crude. It was deliberate, stable, and incredibly efficient. The brilliance of turf lies in physics, not appearance. Soil contains countless pockets of trapped, motionless air. And still air is one of the most powerful insulators known. Long before modern science measured insulation values, Viking builders understood this through experience. Heat stayed where air could not move. Their walls became natural thermal batteries. Earth blocked the wind. Roots locked the structure together. Air pockets slowed heat loss to a crawl. Over time, grass regrew across the walls, tightening the structure even further. The house was no longer placed on the land. It became part of it. What the Vikings built did not separate them from nature. It used nature itself to keep them alive. Fire alone was never enough to keep a Viking household alive through winter. Inside the longhouse, humans did not live in isolation. They lived with animals. During the coldest months, cows, sheep, goats, and horses were brought indoors, occupying large sections of the same structure where people slept, worked, and ate. To modern eyes, this may seem crude. To the Vikings, it was precision energy management. A living animal is a heat engine. A single cow produces as much body heat as several modern space heaters running continuously. Multiply that by a herd, and the result is a steady, reliable source of warmth that never goes out, never needs fuel, and never stops working through the night. The longhouse was designed to take full advantage of this. Livestock areas were set slightly lower than human living spaces. As animals breathed and moved, warm air naturally rose upward, flowing into the areas where people gathered and slept. Heat moved where it was needed without effort or intervention. No pipes. No machinery. No burning extra fuel. Just biology, guided by architecture. The Vikings understood that warmth did not have to be created from scratch. It could be shared, redirected, and sustained by living systems already present. In the longhouse, heat walked, breathed, and lived alongside the people it protected. Cold by itself rarely kills. Wind does. The Vikings understood something modern design often forgets. Moving air is the fastest way to steal heat from the human body and from a home. A calm, freezing night can be survived. A windy one can drain warmth faster than fire can replace it. So Viking architecture focused not on fighting temperature, but on controlling airflow. Drafts were treated as a threat. That is why Viking homes had almost no windows, not because they lacked skill or resources, but because openings were weaknesses. Glass was rare and costly, but even if it had been common, windows were still holes in a house's thermal armor. Darkness was safer than exposure. Walls were built thick and tightly sealed. Entrances were kept low and narrow, forcing people to bend as they entered. This was not symbolic humility. It was physics. A smaller opening meant less cold air rushing inside, and less warm air escaping with it. Many longhouses added a short entry passage or vestibule, an unheated buffer zone that absorbed the shock of the outside air before it reached the living space. It functioned like an early airlock, long before the concept had a name. Inside a Viking home, heat was guarded carefully. It was never allowed to leave easily. At the center of the Viking longhouse burned a fire unlike anything found in modern homes. This was not a fireplace set against a wall. It was a long, open hearth that ran through the heart of the building, sometimes stretching more than 10 meters from end to end. It was the house's thermal backbone. Stone-lined pits beneath the fire absorbed heat as it burned, then released that warmth slowly over hours, even after the flames had faded. In regions where trees were scarce, peat replaced wood. It burned evenly, steadily, and far longer, providing reliable heat without constant attention. The hearth did far more than warm the space. It provided light in the long winter darkness. It cooked food. It dried clothing. It became the social center of the household, where people gathered to work, eat, tell stories, and sleep. Life organized itself around this fire. And yet, there was no chimney. By modern standards, this should have been deadly. Smoke should have filled the house, suffocating everyone inside. But Viking builders understood airflow and heat behavior well enough to make the system work. The fire was not an isolated feature. It was integrated into the entire structure, part of a larger system designed to keep warmth in and danger under control. Inside the Viking longhouse, Smoke did not disappear. It rose slowly and gathered beneath the roof. This was not a flaw in the design. It was part of the system. As the fire burned, hot smoke formed a warm layer near the ceiling, creating an invisible blanket that trapped heat below where people lived and slept. Warmth was held in place, not allowed to escape upward into the winter air. At the same time, the smoke served another purpose. Soot settled onto wooden beams and roof supports, coating them in a thin protective layer. Insects were driven away. Moisture damage slowed. Rot was delayed. The house was being preserved from the inside out, day after day. Viking builders controlled this carefully. Adjustable roof vents allowed smoke to escape when needed, but never all at once. In winter, those vents were kept nearly closed. Air quality was sacrificed deliberately in exchange for warmth. The house did not breathe freely. It breathed slowly. Comfort came second. Survival came first. In Viking architecture, the roof mattered as much as the walls, sometimes more. It was not a thin barrier meant to keep out rain. It was a living layer of protection. Beneath the surface, sheets of birch bark were carefully laid to create a waterproof skin. On top of that, thick layers of turf were stacked, compressing under their own weight. When finished, the roof could weigh several tons. This mass was not a burden. It was insulation. The heavy roof slowed the escape of heat, stabilized interior temperatures, and pressed the entire structure firmly into the ground, anchoring it against relentless winter winds. Sudden temperature swings were softened. Warmth lingered longer. Over time, grass took root across the roof. Roots bound the turf layers together, sealing gaps and shielding the birch bark below from sunlight, rain, and decay. The roof repaired itself simply by being left alone. The house did more than shelter the people inside. It changed with the seasons. It adapted. It grew. What stood beneath the snow was not a dead structure, but a living extension of the land itself. Where modern humans rushed to shovel snow away, the Vikings allowed it to stay. They understood what snow really was. Not an enemy, but insulation. Snow traps countless pockets of still air between its crystals, making it one of the most effective natural insulators on Earth. As winter storms piled drift after drift against longhouse walls and roofs, those layers sealed cracks, blocked wind, and slowed the loss of heat. What looked like burial was actually protection. Entire Viking villages could vanish beneath snowdrifts, leaving only entrances and thin columns of smoke visible against the white landscape. Beneath that frozen armor, the temperature near the walls hovered close to freezing, dramatically warmer than the brutal air outside. The snow absorbed sudden temperature swings. The wind was locked out. Warmth stayed in. The house no longer stood exposed to winter. It was wrapped inside it. And beyond those walls of earth, turf, and snow, the cold was kept where it belonged. Outside. So why did Viking villages never freeze? Not because they generated endless heat. Not because they burned more fuel than everyone else. But because they understood something we often forget. Warmth is not created. It is preserved. The Vikings did not think in terms of buildings. They thought in systems. Every element mattered. Earth packed into walls. Animals sharing living space. Fire embedded into stone. Smoke held beneath the roof. Snow allowed to settle and seal the structure. And human behavior shaped by the limits of winter itself. Nothing worked alone. Heat was slowed, shared, recycled, and protected at every stage. Loss was minimized before more warmth was ever needed. The house became an extension of the environment, rather than a barrier against it. Their homes did not fight nature. They aligned with it. And by doing so, Viking communities created living environments capable of sustaining life in places where many modern buildings would struggle to function without constant energy input. This is not legend. This is not myth. This is primal heritage, the forgotten engineering wisdom of humanity's past. And it leaves us with a quiet question that still matters today. What else have we forgotten? that once kept us alive.